Hi everyone. Thank you, Liv, for mentioning I got here from my appointment just in time. I've been reading your comments. I thought I'd come on a few minutes early just so that we can have a little discussion about ethics if you want to. My students have heard me rant all week about what is happening in these exam papers. I'm completely baffled. I've never seen exam papers quite like this. It's not because they're particularly hard. The questions within themselves are fine, but the fact that the wording's a bit off, they're so specific in some cases, like your natural law questions, specifically on T-loss. These are things you can do, but they seem to be going out of their way to be just a bit more tricky than they need to be. The super ego link, why not just put Freud? Why be deliberately a bit evasive in your questions when you've got so much to remember? The fact there was no direct application, they're going completely off piste. So I agree with what somebody said. Predictions are out the window. You have to learn everything, and obviously that is what the exam board want. They always want you to learn everything, but there's always been some patterns. It seems like they're deliberately breaking all patterns, and I don't know if they are doing it deliberately, but the fact that they ask no application question, they've never ever done that. The fact that they've asked religious experience now 3 years in a row. The fact they're asking the same questions that have been asked in the AS exams, the first year exams, they're just repeating and regurgitating the same questions. They're missing massive amounts of content and focusing on the same things again and again. So with that in mind, somebody asked, why do we think that it might be the same questions again or same topics? Because that's the patterns they've done so far. They don't seem to be going for any of the obvious gaps, and that's absolutely fine. That's OCR's choice, but the fact that some of the wording is a bit off as well, so you need to be so prepared. Please go through the specs tonight, make sure you know all the wording, make sure you're not caught out by anything, because everything they ask is in the specification, but they're going for quite specific things. So the papers so far they've been doable. They've just been a bit bland. I quite liked the euthanasia question. I thought the euthanasia question was quite good. Didn't much like the conscience question. I thought that meta-ethics, well, I did say if meta-ethics was to come up on a chance, it'd probably be intuition, but that was just as a passing, just in case. And then natural law and T-loss, no, definitely wouldn't have thought that. Not when I've just been looking at past questions that have been asked. And with natural law, let me just have a little look. In the second year, 2 specific questions have been asked on natural law. So what I mean is they've asked 2 questions on natural law already with no link to euthanasia. They asked one about the strengths and the one about the weaknesses of natural law and one about the primary precepts. So to ask another specific natural law question and to never have asked one at all on utilitarianism, other than utilitarianism and business, there is just no logic. And I think that's the issue I'm having is, yes, they might break patterns, but there just does seem that there's no logic in the decisions. But that's because none of us are examiners and we haven't wrote the questions. So we need to be prepared for anything and everything. And at least, thank goodness, this time tomorrow lunch, you're done. Unless you've got chemistry. Some of you have got chemistry as well. And that's just painful. 2 exams on the final day. That's just mean. But anyway, let's Martha, I've been asked that question. Do I think the grade boundaries will be lower because the questions are weird? Some students, quite a large amount of students, have really liked it. Some students have really liked the questions. Everything is on the spec, so if you've revised the spec, it is there. So I don't know if the grade boundaries are going to be lower. My issue with them is that there's a lot of quite big mistakes students can make. But that doesn't mean they're going to lower the grade boundaries. I still think that the higher ability students are going to be able to smash these exams, which means the grade boundaries won't necessarily come down, which means that it's disadvantaging others of you that might find philosophy difficult, which is expected because it's hard. It's a hard subject. So we really won't know about grade boundaries or anything else. We can just, hope that it does take into consideration the fact that the questions are worded a bit weird. Um, with consciousness attempting to couple God in Freud's superego. I think the fact that the reason why they mentioned superego was because Freud actually doesn't really ever talk about conscience itself, but it's within the conscience topic. So yeah, I think that would work. That if you've made it clear that Freud actually doesn't necessarily talk about conscience and God, that he talks about the superego, that's what they were wanting you to talk about. It wasn't an error by OCR. That's what they wanted you to talk about, which is why, again, it's, oh, Matilda, that's awful that you have chemistry as well. Well, that's why the questions are quite tricky, like the falsification question. Falsification doesn't actually really ever use the word factual. It talks about, uh, uh, my brain's gone dead now for falsification, but the wording of falsification was peculiar. Only if you really know the areas would you pick out those complexities in the question, and that's what I mean. I don't know if everybody can see that. So yeah, it is the right argument that you've made. Oh, can't leave the example. Well, I hope it's not too warm in there tomorrow. Yeah, Georgia, I agree. I think that they are picking very niche areas. What you have to remember going from this, because it'll help tomorrow, if the examiners pick what you think is a very niche area. So, for example, telos, I use telos as literally a slide and go on to everything else for natural law. It still doesn't mean that everything else isn't important, because it is. I didn't specifically mention, for example, in my video about how the primary precepts linked to telos, but they do. The primary precepts are designed to achieve telos, flourishing of humans, moving towards the perfection, godlike, etc. So I think it's the fact that even if something looks very niche and small, it probably still wants a significant amount of the topic. Your trick is to work out, how does the niche bit link to everything else. Yeah, so I might as well jump straight into your questions. Again, if I do miss any, please feel free to repeat them. The question about whether Christian ethics are distinctive or different to human ethics, that's the secularization area mainly. And this idea that what you need to talk through what Christians teach as far as their key principles, and whether they are similar or different to what generally people know. So, for example, agape. Agape, loving unconditional love towards people you don't know, that is definitely a Christian root, that Jesus' teachings, but then it can also be a human ethic. You don't have to be a Christian to believe that, believe in agape, but then Christians promote loving thy neighbor and thy enemy. Now that's quite hard for people to do without that Christian background. So that's what you would talk about, the actual ethics of Christianity, and whether they are just human understandings, human laws, etc. And the way you would do that is thinking, if you only are a Christian, do you follow it? Or if you're not a Christian, could you still follow it? And so that's how you make out. But things like agape, loving thy enemy, that is quite distinct to Christianity. Obviously, Jesus as the role model is quite distinct to Christianity. So there's a few things that do make it separate from our human ethics, but that doesn't maybe take away that human ethics can still be, or ethics without Christianity can still be very, very good. And that, don't forget, that was Aquinas' natural law. That's the whole of natural law and natural law ethics. You can talk about that, the fact that he wanted to create a theory open to everyone, so that therefore human ethics are just as valuable as Christian ethics. Yeah, that sounds good for your conscience answer. What would you agree that the cost of discipleship is too unrealistic? I definitely think Bonhoeffer is a possibility. I think Bonhoeffer might come up. I think that, Ruby, when you asked, would you agree? I think you could take it either way. The idea of cost of discipleship, this is the idea of cost of your actions, the cost of your orthopraxis as a Christian, that you should give up all of your old life, that you should sacrifice and suffer in order to be a true costly grace Christian. Is that too much? Is that possible? Should that be what we're striving to achieve? So it'll be your choice to say whether it is or is not. And maybe you could argue it to an extent it is, but not fully to Bonhoeffer, who actually sacrificed himself to the Nazis. Maybe on that idea, it's not possible. At least it's over soon, Ella, absolutely. Yeah, I like Bonhoeffer as well. Yeah, absolutely, Liv. Linking Bonhoeffer to orthodoxy, orthopraxy. I think he's the king of orthopraxy. I mean, I love, for me, I always talk about this idea of orthodoxy over orthopraxis. This idea of a lot of Christians just preach the sermons, preach the Bible, preach the scripture, whatever it is. That's orthodoxy. You need to actually practice it, orthopraxis, put it into practice. And that's why Bonhoeffer is such an amazing figure, because he didn't just do the talk. It wasn't empty talk. He actually died for what he believed in. And again, I'm not promoting that as an ethic that people should follow, but it's the idea that at least he did show practicing what he was saying about solidarity. So much so, when he left Germany to safety in America, he returned to Germany, even though he knew it probably would kill him, and it did. So yes. Sabina, the idea that so distinctive with the spiritual values, just human values. So by knowing the spec, you know where the questions come from because of the part on the spec they are. And this is again probably a big help to a lot of you, especially with DCT questions, they're not always clear what topic areas they are. This means that if you are unsure, whatever you write about, make it very clear how what you're writing about links to the question in your line of argument. Therefore, then they have to give you the marks. So, for example, if you did get a question on spiritual values, just human values, and you go down a moral principles route, that's fine. You could go down a secularization route as well. That's fine, as long as you link everything back to those words: spiritual values, human values, spiritual values, human values. You can argue anything. I always give the example of, let me have a little look at the past questions. I think it was that one. Yeah, the liberation theology question. This caused a couple of controversies back in 23. Critically assess Marx's teachings on alienation exploitation. Now, that was on the spec, but a lot of students did sociology answers. That was fine because you answered the question, which is why a lot of people said it's more of a sociology than an RS question. Let me see if I can remember the one where students got really confused. There was a question where some students did completely different answers. I can't remember which one it was, but both got the marks. One set of students wrote a completely different answer to all the other students, and they both got the marks because they linked it back to the question. So that's it. It's your interpretation of the question. That's what the examiners want to see, how you've interpreted the question. Yeah, if your paragraphs end up being really long, that's fine. I think paragraphs just make it easier for the examiners to follow. But if your paragraphs do end up going to a page and more, that is fine. As long as you make it as easy to follow as possible, I would say. What are the AS questions? That's a very good call, Lily. The AS questions from last year are Bonhoeffer, Bonhoeffer's teachings on costly grace, moral principles, the church teachings, person of Jesus on miracles with the Son of God, and oh no, apologies, that one isn't. I've highlighted. Oh, sorry, ignore that. I've highlighted loads of different things on my sheet. Please ignore that. So rephrase that, wipe that. I'll start that one again. The answers last year were Bonhoeffer's Christian Ethics as Costly Grace. Last year's was the universalist belief that all people will be saved. That was an AS question linking to death and afterlife. I'll go over that in a second. I had someone on TikTok asking me a question about that. It was a very good question. So I'll go over that. What were the other two questions? Knowledge of God, to what extent is a full and perfect knowledge of God revealed through the person of Jesus? So that is knowledge of God and revealed knowledge. And the final, that was it. They only asked 3 questions in the first year. So those were the 3 questions. So we've got natural and revealed, Bonhoeffer, and death and afterlife. Those were the questions asked in last year's AS exam. So a little side point, if you see the word universalist, that means everybody is universally saved. That word comes up only in death and afterlife part of the spec, whereas pluralism and theology uses the word pluralism. Now, if in the exam you talk about, the question says everybody will be saved, you can talk about death and afterlife. You can also talk about pluralism and theology. You can talk about the ideas of election, the ideas of inclusivism. That is fine. If you get a question on the universalist approach, it is actually wanting a bit of death and afterlife there. That's a death and afterlife question. If it uses the word pluralism, it's wanting theology and pluralism. So because they're the same idea, they're the same thing. Pluralism believes that everyone will be saved. Universalist believes everyone will be saved. But where the word comes in the spec, that will give you an indication of what topic area they want. But if you completely misinterpret something like that and talk about something different, as long as you link it back to the question, you're fine. Sorry, someone was asking. Sorry, Chloe, I have no predictions on what won't come up. Normally, I would say what came up last year is more than likely not going to come up, or questions where they've run out of questions won't come up. They're repeating the same questions from previous years, and they're going by religious experience. It doesn't matter if it's been asked in the last 2 years, they're asking it again. So liberation theology is still a possibility. Normally, I would say liberation theology, no, because it's been on the last 2 years. Now I think it could be. Molly, quite possibly that is one of the new patterns that's emerging, is they're using a lot of AS, both the AS questions from this year, so you can find them on the website at the bottom of each of the blogs. I put this year's questions for AS ethics, AS DCT, but they're also getting a lot of inspiration from previous year's questions. So there is again a video on YouTube where I've done a PowerPoint of all previously asked questions. So check that out. So, excuse me, make sure there's no questions that I've asked previously you couldn't answer, especially with Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer, there's 3 areas that have never come in the second year and all been asked in the first year. They might ask you pretty much that question again. I hope not, Liv. Yes, you could get 2 questions on pluralism. You could get one on pluralism society, one on pluralism and theology. Again, they've never done it. Oh, this year it's a free-for-all, so they could. They could do a gender and society and a gender and theology. You can answer both as well, of course, which is why I'm saying do not ignore any topics. It's too much of a risk. Just in case, because worst case scenario, normally I would say that obviously logically 32 units overall, it's a minefield, especially because you only did ethics a few days ago. Take out a few topics. Normally I would say that because I'd say at least you got the other topics you could do. The problem with this year's pattern is you might not do a couple of topics or a topic. What happens if you can't understand the wording? What happens if you read a question, for example, gender and theology, you're ready for it, and they ask a really weird question and you go, don't understand what it's wanting there. And therefore, the topic you are prepared for, you don't understand the question. So it's a massive risk not to miss anything off this time. Yeah, it does seem that that's what they're asking us, a lot of past paper questions. Yeah. Somebody else noticed as well. I don't ever look at the sample papers on OCR, and I need to. But there's some sample papers on OCR. They seem to be copying a few of the sample questions as well. Don't know if that was just philosophy though. Somebody did mention that. Key parables, Leo. Just go over the ones in the Jesus spec. So parable of the sheep and the goats, you have to know your original text, folks, because they could ask one of the original texts in your question. So your Malleus Dignitatum, your Ephesians, your sharing gospel of is it sharing the gospel of good faith? No, I think I've completely reworded that one. Oh no, sharing the gospel of salvation. You need to know these because they could put them in redemptoris missio. They could put into the question. So it might not be parables per se, but you need to know your original text. You also need to know that there's 6 biblical references in the person of Jesus topic. They could just put them, especially because they seem to be going completely a bit mean this year. Be prepared. They might put, let me find a wording of it so I get it right. They might put something like, with reference to Mark's 6:47 to 52, critically assess Jesus as the Son of God. Something like that. It probably been worded slightly better. And then you've got what Mark 6 is. They have actually mentioned 6 biblical passages in the specification. The stories, that one's just Jesus walking on water. You'll know the stories, you might not know where they've come from. Normally they tell you what the passages they want. This year we can't expect anything from them. So just make sure, so maybe not parables, but definitely original text, what they're called, and those 6 Bible passages, the one that are specifically mentioned in person of Jesus. Yes. The ones that are suggested, you don't have to know. So the suggested text, you don't need to know. It's the ones that the ones that say things like, for example, or including reference to, those are the ones that you need to know. But your teachers will have gone over them with you. But the extra ones, or the suggested, the ones at the bottom of the spec sections, you don't need to know. They're just extras. John 9, the healing of the blind man, is, yes, correct. Sophie, I'm not sure what part of the spec that is. I don't know if that is knowledge of God or not, because that'll help us work out which angle you would go down. Liv, you would look again within that text, within the context of the whole topic. So it's how that text has influenced. So it wouldn't just be the text. It would be, for example, how motherhood and family have been shown within Ephesians, things like that. And you'd still talk about gender and the role of gender. You could still bring you different names. You just angle it towards the text and what it implies about motherhood, for example. Paragraph length doesn't matter, no. Yeah, unfortunately, Erin, OCR do expect an awful lot from you with your Christian understanding. So Christian moral action. So what was your actual? To know God's will. Let me have a look. Christian moral action. Yeah, so it's not always, it's whether or not it is possible always to know God's will. That would be kind of your ideas around grace, the idea that you'd hope that God would show you the way, that even though God may have selected people to run the state, that you've got to maybe disobey the state, go down what you believe God's will is, even though we might not always directly know God's will. That's how I would angle that. So it'd still just be Bonhoeffer, keywords Bonhoeffer, and how that would show God's will or not God's will. Christian moral principles might come up. Yeah. Especially because I can't remember the AS question that's been asked this year. I'm sure it came up in the AS, but I think that moral principles, especially maybe around the church or something like that, they might do, because they asked it last year for agape. They might, I'm sure it was, I'm sure they asked it moral principles. Yeah, it was agape last year. They've only asked 2 questions. It might be moral principles again. Yeah, I think Augustine is more likely, but that's not getting us anywhere at the moment, is it really? Hiya, Alfie. So yes, there's a significant overlap between death and afterlife and pluralism and theology. There's a lot of overlap between all of DCT, which means you can talk about both depending on what the word is they use. If they talk about election, it's death and afterlife. If they talk about and use the word exclusivist, inclusivist, or pluralist in the question, it's a pluralism and theology, which means you can still talk about the other topic, but that would be the synoptic link. Whereas if it's everyone is saved and there's no universalist or no pluralist word, then you can basically do a free for all of both topics. But usually they will make it clearer which area. If you, for example, did miss the cue and talk about the other theory, that is fine as long as it links to the question. Yes, they could ask 2 questions on pluralism. Yeah. They could ask a question on free will, Jimmy, for Augustine, because in the spec for Augustine, it does say how sin has come through human selfishness and lack of free will. It is mentioned on the spec, so they could ask you something to do with that. And then obviously the lack of free will is more the fact that we are so sinful, and because of you know, seminally present in Adam and Eve, we are so sinful that this actually counters our free will a bit because we are always inclined towards evil. And so that's what you would talk about, and whether Augustine is, whether that idea works. Oh, absolutely. Moral action to liberation theology, definitely. Liberation theology actually links into a lot of topics overlap. Secularization, it comes up all over the place. Person of Jesus, Bonhoeffer, liberation. They all go together when you think about it. Jesus is the one that inspires it. Liberation theology is the one that looks to Jesus's actual actions and works out how can we help the poor. And Bonhoeffer again is using the actions of Christ to influence his arguments. So they all, and then obviously Bonhoeffer shows orthopraxis to the full extent, very much like what liberation theology is trying to do. So yes, there's a lot of synoptic links which you can talk about, and that would be really good for an essay. I think, George, what I was meaning is yes, evil is a privation of good, linking to your problem of evil, but we're more inclined away from goodness then. Sorry, that was just a very shorthand way of me saying that we're inclined towards evil. It was just a shorthand way of saying it. But yes, he doesn't believe that we pick evil, because evil isn't a thing that was created by God, but we happen to not pick goodness then, if that's a bit of a tighter wording. So yeah, that was more me wording it than Augustine. No, you wouldn't lose too many marks if Augustine, you leave too much into philosophy. What you've always got to be careful of, and this is for any question, that an examiner doesn't read your answer and go, they've just wanted a problem of evil question, now they're trying to crowbar it in here. You have to always be very clear that you've read the question, you know what the examiners are wanting. You want to bring in a bit of problem of evil, and that's fine. Just don't do a whole problem of evil essay. You have to show some DCT spec information for Augustine, like original sin, like his influences, like before and after the fall. These are all things you've learned in DCT, not problem of evil, but you can still talk about problem of evil because it's the same man. Yes, the stealing the pear. So even though you're not hungry at all, he still stole it. I mean, to be honest with you, I think he just made up that story to say how we're all inclined towards not doing good. And just like him, he wasn't hungry, but he still stole a pear. Oh, he stole a pear. Oh, that means we're all sinful. Yeah, it's a bit melodramatic. Don't say that in an exam. Don't call Augustine melodramatic. You'll be surprised, Jimmy. You'll be surprised that DCT is often done quite well. I think DCT is one of the easier ones. I know you won't be feeling that all right now, but philosophy is very structured. You have to know which name it is, which argument, who goes against it, how you say it. Ethics, again, you've got the application juggling, even though they miss that out completely, but you're juggling lots of theories and topics and linking it in. DCT, recognize what topic it is, show the examiners you know what topic it is by mentioning some things, then bring everything else in. Throw the kitchen sink in, as long as you link it back to the question and the argument that you're developing. DCT doesn't really have a real set structure like the others. Your evaluation is a lot more natural. It really is just a discussion. DCT is a proper discussion of the question you've been asked. So actually, I think it's actually easier to answer as DCT. Oh yes, Jimmy, absolutely. That Augustine's teachings are very much a reflection of him and his life. You could always use an evolution against Augustine as well, or some of the criticisms in Problem of Evil. Schleiermacher, I talk about in Problem of Evil, the idea of why a perfect world logically can't go wrong. So it's this idea that yes, it's a reflection of his background. How can Adam and Eve break the perfection? It doesn't work. Nature of God overlaps quite a lot as well. Certainly, if you see the idea of loving God or anything like that, you can talk about nature of God. Anything to do with Jesus's knowledge of God. What did Jesus know? He was divine, unique Son of God. You can talk a little about nature of God. Was he fully omniscient? Did he know he was going to die? Did he know the future? Did he have human knowledge, etc.? So that again works really well. I don't think Augustine, actually, I don't think Augustine was that scared of women. It's funny point though. I think he was sulking by the fact that his mother made him not have his girlfriend anymore. Because obviously the historical part of it, you don't need to go into this in the exam, of course, but the historical thing is that Augustine was quite happy. He was a bit of a lad. He was quite happy. He had a mistress for years. They had a child together. And then he worked his way up the ranks within the church. I think he became a bishop or something like that. And his mother went, "No, Augustine, no bishop should not be married." So, and she like presented him with like a 14-year-old or something like that. And Augustine was like, "Nah, I ain't marrying her, mother, no." And she was like, "Well, you have to get rid of your mistress." So I think he's just basically sulking. He had to get rid of his mistress. He had to abandon his child. He wasn't going to marry this other girl that his mother's presenting. And I think he just got a bit bitter, therefore he can't have sex, no one else can, sex is sinful, and he just kind of went off on this epic rant. And now we get to talk about it, so please, yeah, don't talk about Mother Monica and his mistress. But yeah, it puts it a bit into context that actually I think he was quite a lover of women. I don't think he had a massive issue until that happened. Something like that, Georgia. Don't forget, Mary, Jesus's mother, was about 13 when she had Jesus. It wasn't uncommon back in them days to marry much younger women. It's not uncommon in some countries to marry much younger women. But yeah, I can't remember specifically how young she was, but I know she was a lot younger than Augustine, put it that way. Oh yeah, by the end he was. By the end he was he was not a bachelor, he was celibate, and yeah, very anti-sex. Yeah, for Bonhoeffer, go with that. Yeah, Aquinas, and that's Aquinas is a very good comparison for Augustine, because Aquinas with his synderesis, as someone has already mentioned, Aquinas' synderesis is the idea that he believes we're naturally inclined towards goodness. Yes, sometimes we go wrong, apparent goods, real goods, etc. Sometimes we go the wrong avenue, but actually Aquinas is very supportive of humans using reason, giving everyone the opportunity to be ethical, whereas Augustine just goes, "Nah, you're sinful, you've got no hope unless God's generous love and grace shines upon you." So yeah, Aquinas is always a good comparison to Augustine. Yeah, absolutely, Philip. So that works really nicely. Check out, if you haven't gone over liberation theology, check out the teach along video. So there is a video on here that will help. Doctor, preferential option, not sure, Matthew. Not, it's not that you're wrong. I don't, I don't know. The questions on the different sections of Jesus. So Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, the Liberator, and Jesus, the Moral Teacher. Yes, they do want different things. There's two specific Bible passages for each section. It also wants social and political liberator. So there's specific stories that it would want. The ideas of, was Jesus a social liberator? Was he a political liberator? And so then teacher of wisdom, it wants about the teachings of Christ, the fulfillment of the law, the Sermon on the Mount, and then obviously Jesus is the Son of God. That's the miracles, the resurrection, the divine and holy nature. So you can overlap little bits from the other area, that he's not just the Son of God, he was also a teacher of wisdom and liberator. That's fine. But there are very specific things they would be looking for in those answers. Oscar, I have no idea which ones they'll repeat. So obviously they asked the three last year. Bonhoeffer, what did I say? Bonhoeffer, Natural and Revealed, and Death and Afterlife. I don't think Death and Afterlife necessarily, but I think Bonhoeffer was always a possibility. But I think Natural and Revealed is also a possibility now, and that was what I didn't think would necessarily be on there. So social liberator is more about freeing the people. Political liberator is who he was going against. The fact he broke the laws, like not working or doing things on the Sabbath and things like that. So it was actually, the political is more the political stance that he was making. The idea that the people in charge and power were getting annoyed. Hence why they put him to death. Jesus was murdered. You know, he didn't actually do anything wrong. He was just too much of a powerful figure, and he was too much of a threat and a worry for politicians, whereas social liberator is freeing people from the social chains that they've got. Hence why it's a fantastic link to things like liberation theology as well. Gender theology is Daly and Ruther. Gender and society is how gender is seen in society, like your Ephesians passage. Do you have to use scholars? You don't have to use scholars in any of them, really. Scholars help. But don't forget, like I said, if you talked about Bonhoeffer, he's a scholar. So even just any name, any link. I was talking about one earlier. I think I can't remember where it was, but means to an end comes up somewhere. If you see things like this and go, oh, Kant, make a link. If you see anything about fulfillment, I always think of Aquinas and flourishing, make a link. So there's lots of names you can still bring in, but you don't have to necessarily mention scholars in things like death and afterlife, but sheep and the goats would class as that. The rich man, poor man, Lazarus, that would count as kind of a name. It's not a scholar, but it's still an argument. So they would classify that as the same thing. Dan, with Ruther and Liberator, I think Ruther's potentially, but I think Ruther, there's already so much to talk about with her. I wouldn't necessarily link it into Liberator, but I guess you could do if you're seeing a really clever link. But I think there's enough to say about Ruther without having to link her into something else. Um, just so there's no, yeah, I agree. There's no correlation, gender and society, sex ethics. I don't like I said in one of the videos, I do think they're playing pin the tail on the speck. I don't think they've got any logic with what they're picking at all. Or we've asked that question, so we best now ask this. No, I do think they're just going that one. That's what I think they're doing with the spec. I think they're just picking out random things. That's how it feels anyway. I doubt that is the case, of course, but that's certainly, yeah, we can't work out any patterns at all. Yeah, Cahill would work. Definitely. definitely. So that would be, but I think she works both for gender and society and gender and theology. But absolutely, so yes, if you see overlaps, then that's fine. But they would never go, oh, because we've not asked that, we'll ask this. They're not going to think like that. But definitely, the argument that she presents about how Christianity is actually there to defend and help women, marriage was there to support and help women. Christianity actually came to women's rescue. Definitely very relevant. Natural theology, you can talk about teleological, so yes, Aquinas. There's a few different names on the teach along video, so just watch them, but there's nobody specific you have to talk about necessarily. Yeah, so Cahill's an argument, it's in the sex ethics teach along, but basically she argues that Christianity, by creating marriage, it was to actually defend women and help them so their husbands didn't keep leaving them. So people always criticize Christianity and say, oh, there's no divorce, there's no women's rights. And actually, it's not correct, or it's not always correct, that actually marriage was designed to protect women, because what men were doing was they were taking their innocence, their virginity, and then just leaving them. And obviously these women couldn't read, they couldn't write, they were educated, and then nobody else wanted them because they were no longer virgins. And so these women were just desolate. So marriage meant this idea, and again, the Ephesians quote, people are really up in arms to say, you know, women get compared to a church and men get compared to Jesus. No, the point is that men need to look after their woman just like Christ looks after the church, that men need to look after their wife, that even though that wife says wives should submit to your husbands, and it just says husbands should love their wives. That's the whole point, is that men didn't love their wives. They just either got more wives or divorced them and moved on, or accused them of, oh, she's an adulterous stoner. Come on, love, let's go and have a beer or whatever they did back in them days for a bit of fun. So it was the fact that the idea that actually Christianity said, no, if you marry this woman, you're stuck with her. You will not leave her. You will look after her. You will love her. She will honor you like you honor Christ, but you need to look after her. So it's there's a lot of layers to these different arguments. So it's not always an attack on women, which is quite an interesting angle. So that's Cahill's argument. Definitely, Adam. I would say specific statistics for secularism, specific statistics for pluralism and society, anything to do with the idea of secularization, anything to do with, you know, if you're talking about liberation theology and poverty, know about what the level of poverty is, for example, in Latin America. The other thing is, I would say that, yeah, any synoptic links you can make, any real life cases, anything from the news, what's going on, anything like that, bring it all in here as well to actually know what's going on. I think secularism will come up, yes. That's my original prediction. Again, there's only so many times I can question myself, but secularism was one of the areas I thought would come up. Yes, the outlawing of adultery meant they couldn't cheat on their wives, exactly. They couldn't cheat on their wives, that they had to look after their wife that they'd married and made a commitment to in the eyes of God and the church. Yes. Oh, that's lovely. I'm really pleased I was able to help. Main points for Ruther is the ideas of warrior versus a servant king. This idea of that she believed that we just need to transform Christianity. We don't need to completely abandon it, like Daly argues. The idea of Sophia, the female language used in the Bible, and how actually it was both feminine and masculine. So that's the main parts of Ruther. Oh, Megan, you've just repeated that. So, yeah, you're on the right lines, Megan. So originally, I thought it would be Augustine, secularization, person of Jesus, and potentially either a Bonhoeffer or a gender and theology. Those were my kind of original areas. Now I think it could be liberation, it could be natural and revealed, it could be a death and afterlife. It really, yeah. Secularism, Freud and Dawkins, and humanism. Make sure you know humanism. New covenant, can't means to an end. Zoe, definitely, that's really good link. Liv, that's not that bad. It's about the quality, not how much you write. Um, Megan, yes, I was actually discussing this today with my students. The idea that um, the male warrior messiah was a very interesting concept, that they were predicting this warrior to come forward. You know, you think of kind of Hercules or Thor, and then they got Jesus, not at all a fighter. And so Jesus was more the servant king. He was there to wash people's feet and grant miracles and listen and help the outcast in society. Oh, hello, cats. To help the outcast in society. So he was more a man to serve, not to be the warrior king. But then Jesus had to be male. So what we were discussing about today is the fact that what came first, the patriarchy or Christianity? The patriarchy was established long before Christianity. Christianity did not create this patriarchal view of men over women. That was long before Christianity. And the fact that, for all we know, God may have already sent us a woman. We might have had the first coming, and she might have been a woman, and we stoned her as soon as we possibly could. Jesus had to be a man because nobody else would have listened to him. So he had to be a man, but that's because of the patriarchy, not because Christianity. So it's a bit of an interesting angle, is that one? Yeah. King of the Jews. It's a very interesting question, is that, Tom? Jesus is the liberator or the Son of God, because Jews don't see him as the Son of God. So it's a hard one because it was obviously put on his cross, but then Christianity came afterwards. So I don't know if it was put on the cross as a sign that he was King of the Jews, as a liberator of Jews, or as the Son of God for Jews. But obviously later on now he's not seen as the Son of God at all. So maybe just liberator. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I never really thought about it. What sort of questions can be asked on hell? I mean, hell and purgatory has been asked in the second year. Look into the first year. I guess hell, same with any of them, hell, heaven, or purgatory. The main three arguments would be: is it an actual place? Is it a physical place? Where physical happiness, physical pain happens. So, is it an actual place? Is it a spiritual place? Is hell a spiritual place, or is it just here? Is it the journey of part of our life? So it's not actually after death; it's now. So those are kind of the three areas they would ask around hell. Yes, so the stoning of the woman's a very significant story. There's a significant amount of biblical stories, New Testament stories. I mean, this is the good thing. This is interesting about Mary Daly. Mary Daly criticizes Christianity for being sexist, but uses most Old Testament teachings. Well, Christianity's New Testament. Yes, Jesus was a Jew, so he looked to the Old Testament, but Christianity is New Testament. And there's very little in the New Testament that criticizes or punishes women. Actually, what you have is quite the opposite. Jesus was extremely, the bleeding woman, the adulterous woman, the woman that poured perfume over him. All of these occasions, the fact that women, he was very close to women. Mary Magdalene might have even been a disciple. He was very close to his mother. You know, Jesus went to women and to men. So when you look at Daly's arguments, quite often she selectively picks the arguments that suit what she's saying, which is what a lot of people do. But a lot of it as well is Old Testament, so it's not even what Jesus says anyway. Yeah, if you don't know humanism, go over it. Look to the PowerPoint. It's quite a massive area is humanism, and they could ask you it. So they could ask a question. The views of secular humanists, that the belief that Christian belief is personal and should play no part in public. So it's the idea that you should remove Christianity from, there should be no religious schools, for example. Dawkins says something very similar. So the idea that there should be no Christians in the House of Lords making legal decisions. They're Christians, they shouldn't be part of the legal system. So humanism is an anti no, it's not an anti-Christian, it's just it doesn't have it's not a faith system, and so it's much more of a secular approach. Topic is humanism in secularization, Erin. Mel, don't bog yourself down with loads of names, just stick to a few, and they'll come back to you. I promise they'll come back to you tomorrow. When you see the links coming up in your sentences, the names will flow, so don't worry yourself. For the person of Jesus, you would go both ways. The idea of, did Jesus know he was divine or not? So not knowing he was divine, the idea that he never actually called himself the Son of God. He didn't really talk about himself in that way. So you could give the Rainer Onion example of maybe deep down in Jesus, he was the divine, but he wasn't consciously aware of it. Because then obviously the issue is, if he was aware of it, then he knew he was going to die. If he died on the cross, did he then just fake suffering? If, was he actually human? But was he just human then with the ability to have all knowledge, including knowledge that he was from God? Or was he just God? Did he know that he was the Son of God, but just still human? Did he know that he was going to be able to do these miracles? So it's more the questions that you would ask, to do with what are the implications of the different things of whether he does or does not know he's divine. I think it's a risk, Mel, not revising two topics because they both might come up. You can, as I said, you can risk missing one topic, but it depends if you understand the wording of the rest that are left. If that topic that you've missed comes up and you don't know the wording of the other topics, it's just, again, it's a massive risk. I talked about the distinctive bit at the beginning, so just rewatch the beginning of the stream. If you can remember it's from Ephesians, I would add it in. If you can remember it's Ephesians, why you might as well add in the knowledge that you've got. Yeah, exactly. It's a risk missing off a topic. It means you're stuck with what is left. Absolutely, Zoe, that would work very well. Well, yeah, you could say it's in the Bible, but if you know it's Ephesians, then if you can't remember it's Ephesians, then just put Bible or scripture. But yeah, if you can remember it, you might as well add it on. And don't forget, if you get it wrong, they don't knock you a mark off. So sometimes it's worth just putting it anyway, just in case. Yeah, they do seem to be a bit. Yeah, literally the start, I talked about the distinctive nature, human ethics versus Christian ethics. What's the difference? I think that's what you're meaning anyway. Adding quotes helps. You can get an A star without bringing in quotes. They're wanting you to interpret the question. That's what they're wanting you to engage with the question. What does the question imply? What's your interpretation of the question? Again, that vein of argument, that's what they're wanting. So quotes help, names help, but that's what they want. That's where the money is. Yeah. Georgia, I mentioned about grade boundaries earlier. Thank you, Sparks. I don't think OCR are thinking that they're being mean. Because when you look at it, the question on natural law, telos and natural law, it's not that mean. The euthanasia question, the fact they asked about superego and conscience, it's not that mean because it's on the spec. You've learnt Freud. I don't think OCR thinks that they're being mean at all. I think and I don't think they're being that mean. What's throwing me off is the fact that the philosophy topics were 4 of the areas that students very publicly don't like. Students do not like religious experience. They do not like religious language. They find body and soul hard and ontological. You either love it or you hate it. It's like Marmite. It's like nature of God. You either love it or you hate it. So the fact that they didn't give a break in any of that. So I don't think they're being deliberately mean at all. And so I don't think they'll be aware of it. I think that it's just because they've broken all the patterns. I mean, I was currently just before the live stream, I was counting up how many application questions they've done in previous years. And I'll be very interested to see. And by the looks of it, pretty much every year has had more than one, but I can't give you the numbers yet, apart from this year. They can do that, but it's just different. Oh, well, Ella, that's very good. I'm pleased it was a dream. Was rogue. Lucy, you don't have to say which passages they are unless you know it. So it's just in case the passages are in the question, they don't tell you what the passage is. That's the only reason I'd say that you need to know them. But if you can remember if it's Mark 6 or Luke 12 or whatever it is, then great. If you can't, fine. Yeah, it's a massive expectation. 3 essays, 40 marks a piece over 32 units. To potentially kind of degree standard essays with content and evaluation at a deeper level, it's not easy. It definitely isn't easy. I think you guys do absolutely amazingly well. I mean, I did RS back in the day, a long time ago. My essays are nothing like how you do it now. Nothing like it. It was a little bit of here's a strength, here's a weakness, here's a strength, here's a weakness, here's a bit of argument. That was enough to get you a very good mark. Now the essays that you guys write are degree level. Gender and society. Again, you've got your main themes could be your key texts and the kind of the interpretations of what different popes have said, like Pope John Paul II. You could talk about how gender is seen in society and the influences that Christianity has had on that, or how Christianity has changed because of the views of society on gender. Yeah, last time you have to revise RS. Yeah, if one essay is not going to mess your whole grade up, 1 out of 9, no, you're fine. Right, folks, we are nearly out of time. Any more questions? Anything else I can go over? If you do have questions, please just pop them under videos, because I appreciate I'll have missed a lot of what you were going to ask and everything else like that. So I do apologize that I've missed quite a bit. But if you do have any burning questions, just put them under this video afterwards and I'll try and respond tonight. What's for tea? What is for tea? I can't even remember. I can't even remember. My brain is turning into yogurt. I'm having some pasta, some bolognese. There we go. It came to me, bolognese for tea with a bit of cheeky garlic bread. The key texts, right, Ella? The key texts are, other than the Bible for Jesus, I don't want to miss anything off. Key texts are Redemptoris Missio, sharing the gospel of salvation, Ephesians, Malleus Dignitatum. Apologies for my terrible pronunciation. Those are the main ones. Yeah, Those are the main texts that they could ask in a question. You're very, very welcome. Vatican II. Well, the Vatican II is pluralism and theology, but I guess you could bring it up in quite a lot, to be honest with you, about how they tried to adapt to what they were seeing, modernize the Catholic Church. So you could bring it into something like secularization, for example. Jesus key texts. So if you'll have to just check the spec because there are the six, and two of them go for wisdom, two of them go for liberator. But it's things like walking on water, good Samaritan. So text you will know, you just might not know them as Mark 6, etc. I'm really pleased I can help. Yeah, no problem. Queen of Yorkshire, I'm liking that one, Georgia. That is a new one. That is a new one. Someone else told me as well that they read a lot of their philosophy with a Yorkshire voice. I am sorry. Yeah, you'll be having withdrawal symptoms, everyone. You'll be like, something's missing. Oh, it's that Yorkshire woman rabbiting on in my ear with her funny stories and strange things she says. Yeah, no. I'm just really pleased I can help. And it's really interesting hearing your questions, though, for me. It's really interesting to know what questions people have, what areas you've picked out. So you help me learn things as well. You help me keep it fresh, so that I know what everyone else is learning and covering, etc. So I am really pleased. Just let me know how it goes tomorrow. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening with the papers. Let's just hope that they finish on a decent paper where you go into that paper exam and you just go, oh, yes, Augustine, straightforward. Secularization, straightforward. Gender and theology, straightforward. I'm not going to hold my breath for that, though, but I just show off again. Do not doubt yourself. Argue something, link it to the question, and just it's your last one. Go out with a bang. Do your absolute best that you can, and it's done. Before you know it's going to be over. Before you know it, it's going to be finished and done. I don't know if I don't know if the examiners would even know who I am. So yeah. No, I'm really pleased that got a clash tomorrow. Best thing to do before the exam, go over essay plans, actual content, essay plans, lines of argument, essay plans. Don't bog yourself down with content. Your brain will already be fried from your first exam. I would chill, meditate for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I wouldn't go over content. No. I would just maybe just do a little bit of a run through in your mind of the different topics and things like that, but I wouldn't go over more content. I think your brain will be fried. Pray. Pope Francis is awesome. May he rest in peace. Pope Francis can come up in a lot of places, minus the things he said about homosexuality and took it back, of course. He did make a few mistakes in his time. But yes, and don't forget the current Pope as well. Could knowledge of God come up? Yes. Or did they make a hard media paper? I'm really pleased to hear that they haven't just picked on us. So even though we are to the bitter end, which again I think is a bit mean that everyone else finished weeks ago and we're still here, aren't we? But anyway, yeah. What's OCR doing? Yeah, he did take it back. He did take it back. But can you always say sorry for things when it's out there? But anyway, we'll let that one go. Book's brilliant. Absolutely, interfaith build bridges. Pope Leo, fantastic, definitely. Right till the bitter end. Christian Jenna, Christian moral actions, Bonhoeffer. It's Bonhoeffer. This is just their year. Yeah, it is just their year. Oh, well, I'm very honoured, Sabina. I'm pleased that you've had some social interaction now. Interfaith dialogue, folks, just don't panic. Don't panic. Interfaith dialogue comes up in pluralism and society. Took me a while to that one. Go over the spec. Go over the specification. Type into Google OCR religious studies specification. Scroll down to the DCT and read everything they've put, because that's what they're going to ask you questions from, and therefore you'll know all the bits that go with all the different questions. Yeah, I think we're panicking as well, Georgia. We've got this. You have absolutely got this. Final exam. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your enthusiasm. I know that a lot of you are going to be so tired at this point as well. You're going to be completely brain fried having this many weeks of continuous exam stress. It's not easy at all. So you've done so well. After tomorrow, you won't know what to do with yourselves. After tomorrow, you can give your brains a complete break. So just let me know how it goes. I'll be thinking about you all in the morning. Let's pray for good questions, but whatever questions you get, you can do it. You absolutely can do it. Right, tea time, everyone. My bolognese, now I've remembered what I'm having. So please keep in touch and let me know how it goes. Bye, everyone. Bye.